Welcome back. I hope you had enjoyed the break and that you are ready for the next segment of our lesson. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the advantages of bipedalism. And we know that bipedalism means that it's organisms that walk upright, in an upright position, and they walk on their hind limbs all the time. Okay, so what are the advantages of bipedalism? Okay, there are several advantages. First of all, bipedalism allows us to free up our hands. So our hands now become free to pick up things, to carry things, to pick food, to handle food, to handle tools, to handle weapons, to carry in offspring, whatever. Okay, so that's the first advantage. The second advantage is with us standing up, our eyes are higher off the ground. So now, because we are in a higher, our eyes are in a higher position, we are able to see the surrounding area very much better than if we were down. And if you can imagine, when humans first started with bipedal movement, the environment was grassland with trees and things, so that they would then be able to see predators or prey much easier from this vantage point. The third thing is that the movement becomes much easier. It's much more energy efficient to walk on two limbs and not on all fours. So that was, the movement then allowed them to walk further distances or longer distances and move in that way. Right, the other thing about standing upright in a bipedal position is that when you're in an upright posture, there's less of your body surface exposed to direct sunlight. And that had the advantage of cooling down the body, so that it was kind of a temperature regulating mechanism. Also, by lifting the vital organs that we find in the body off the ground, where the heat is being radiated off the ground, and then there's more air flow that could cool the body down. And then the last advantage is that in courtship behavior, it allows for the sex organs to be displayed, and organisms then would be able to find a mate. All right, so let's have a look at the anatomical differences. Now, obviously, when the posture and the position in which we move changed, there would be changes in the body structure. And that is what separates us to the rest of primates. Okay, so let's have a look. If we see on this diagram, we can see humans in an upright position, whereas other primates are in a quadrupedal. So we talk about they're walking on four limbs. So that's a quadrupedal movement. Quadrupedal movement. So that they walk then on all four, whereas us, we are bipedal, which means two limbs. Okay, so let's have a look at the actual differences. All right, so there are specific characteristics that we look at, and it's important to know these. The first one would be the position of the foramen magnum, so that we need to look at that. The second characteristic we look at is the spine, the shape of the spine. The third characteristic we have a look at is the pelvis, the size and the shape of the pelvis. And then we have a look at the size of the cranium. Okay, and that also is different. And then again at the dentition. And those characteristics then are those are the things that have changed due to the fact that humans have become bipedal and the rest of primates are still quadrupeds. Okay, so let's have a look at the first one, the foramen magnum, which means large hole. Sorry, so if we have a look in photograph number 4 here, we can see this is a human cranium or a human skull. And here we can see this is where the foramen magnum is, as opposed to if we have a look at an ape cranium, there we can see where the foramen magnum is. So we have specific terminology that we use when we look at the human one. We say it is in a more forward position. We don't talk about center, in the middle. We talk more forward position, and that then allows the spinal cord to enter vertically. Whereas in apes, their foramen magnum is in a more backward position, and that is important because they are quadrupeds, so that the shape of their spine and their head is positioned there. So in other words, the foramen magnum would be in a more backward position, whereas humans, it's going to be in the middle. Okay. Right. Okay, so now we're looking specifically at the spine, and that is proof of bipedalism. And as I said, the spine of a human we talk about it as being more curved. So we say it is more curved because you can see it curves that way, and then it goes goes outwards and then inwards and then outwards again. So we talk about curved, or we say it is S-shaped. Whereas if we have a look at the ape, the spine of an ape, we talk about it as being C-shaped, or we say it is less curved. All right, so that's then C-shaped. All right, so now we've had a look at the foramen magnum and we've looked at the spine. Now we're going to have a look at the difference in the pelvic girdle. And that is the attachment to which our lower limbs are attached. Okay, so in a gorilla, we talk about the pelvis being long and narrow. So if you have a look at the first two diagrams here, you can see we've got a very long pelvis and it's a lot narrower. Okay, then if you compare it to a human pelvis, it's shorter. So we talk about it shorter, but it is wider. So the important terminology here, when we describe the differences, we say shorter, so it's short and wide. We must use those words when we describe the human pelvis. When we talk about an ape pelvis, we talk about it being long and we talk about narrow. Okay, so those are important terminology. So when we do answer these kind of questions in the exams, it's very important that we use the correct terminology. Right, then the next difference we're going to have a look at is the brain size and obviously then the size of the cranium. And remember, the skull is the whole structure that forms the head. But when we talk about the cranium, we're only talking about the part that houses the brain. So it's just this part. It's not the facial bones, because then that makes up the rest of the skull. It's just the brain box, or the cranium that houses the brain. Okay, so that's the part where the brain is found, and the larger the cranium, the larger the brain. Okay, and here if we have a look at, this is a chimp brain or skull, and we can see the cranium here is much smaller than this one of Homo sapiens. Can you see how much larger the cranium is? So that means all of that capacity, the volume in there is much more than we find in this segment here. Okay. And then the last thing that we're going to have a look at is dentition. So dentition is the teeth. So it has to do with the teeth, and here we have a look at an ape, the teeth of an ape. We can see the difference. Here we're having a look at the teeth of humans, and we have a look at this diagram at the bottom here, and we can see there's various differences in this diagram between human and gorilla. And what we see here is that here we have very large canines. We also have a space. The shape of the palate and the jaw is more U-shaped, whereas if you have a look in humans, our canines are very small. Okay, so they're not as large. There's no gaps. The palate and the jaw shape is more arch, more of a C or an arch shape. So it's very different. Okay, so to sum up then, in a little table, it's easy to learn, to study. So if we have a look at the different features, if we're looking at the cranium, in humans there's a much larger cranium or large brain, whereas in African apes it's much smaller. Brow ridges, they're not well developed in humans, whereas they're quite prominent and well developed in apes. The spine, we said, is more curved or S-shaped, whereas in apes it's less curved. The pelvic girdle is short and wide, whereas in apes it's long and narrow. The canines, if we have a look, are small, whereas they are large. And then the arrangement of the teeth, there's very small gaps or no gaps, whereas in apes there's much larger gaps. The palate shape is small and semicircular, whereas that's long and rectangular. The jaws are small, less prognathous, so they don't stick out or protrude as much, whereas in apes, more prognathous. And the cranial ridges, humans don't have any, whereas they are across the top of the cranium. And the foramen magnum, we said, is in a more forward position, whereas it's in a backward position for apes. Okay, and that's all we have time for today. I hope you enjoyed the lesson, and we'll see you again next time.